have different disagreements on them, but these characteristics about being a progressive, which, by the way, will be on the test. That will be on Friday. The test on Friday, there'll be 15 to 1,000 multiple choice. So I'm looking at about 60. 3 to 4 short ID. Sound good? It's going to be on Friday. I already gave you the review list, or the last 3 columns. There'll be some short IDs on, and I'll tell you a little bit more when I finish writing it. I'm still kind of half done with it, on the progressives. So speaking about that, I gave you characteristics of the progressives. Everyone, go back and let's look at that really quick. Go back in your notes, go and find it. Way back when, and we're talking that those heady days of Friday. We were so much younger then. Remember that? We've changed so much. Who traveled? Who saw the world over their break? Yeah, did you? Where'd you go?
Las Vegas.
You went to Vegas?
Yeah.
We're going to Vegas. Whirlwind, like 8 an hour?
I'm not on Friday.
A lot?
$24.
Ooh. I gotta be honest with you, I have never been actually in Vegas.
We drove past Vegas one time. I just saw like the strip go by the window.
Because it's too much money to move. You saw the strip go by, yeah?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
I went to Hoover Dam, but didn't go to Vegas. Too much big money there. Anybody else see the world? Where'd you go?
Went to Utah.
That's halfway to Vegas. And
Tuscany. We went to those.
same thing, Bozeman, Siena, almost the same place. I don't want to brag, but I drove through East Helena. All right. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I made it out. Back to the progressive. I gave you characteristics. So what's one of the characteristics? First off, yeah, society can improve. So therefore, what was your view on laissez-faire? Yeah, we could do. You can make the change. Also, what's your view on social Darwinism? Kind of yes and no. They didn't like it. Yet some elements they like. What's another one? They said who should be, what kind of people should be chosen to run things? Yeah, this idea of experts, technocrats. What's another thing? Government should do what? Yeah, regulation. That was the whole thing about the jungle. And what's the most important regulation to control what? Monopolies. And what else? That belief in what? Yeah, they call it social justice. People use the term social justice today, but like anything else, terms bounce around and get different meanings. PR's idea of social justice was what should be expanded, get more people involved. Not only democracy on one, and what's the other one? Yeah, middle class. So, review, we talked about, experts, what would be the experts that would run cities? Yeah, city manager. And then do we get through this? We got Wisconsin, we get election, we get referendum initiative. We get that? A couple of referendums initiatives right now in courts for Montana. Every state has different laws. Some don't have any. Do we get to recall?
That's a direct primary.
And do we talk about direct primary at all? Or just write it down? Let's make sure we get this. Direct primary no longer will be conventions of party leaders that will meet like in the state or the national level. This is all state level. So at the state level, choose who's going to run for the House or the governor. We'll let members of the party vote in an election. So no longer, they always called it the smoke-filled room because everybody smoked back then. So the whole idea was, we'll let voters pick, and therefore more small d democracy. More democracy. And the thought was that will lead to better candidates, that'll be more responsive to the people. And Montana would do this relatively early. And most states would have primaries by the 1960s, but for president, this would not happen until 72 for the Democrats and 76 for the Republicans. And so it's going to be a while for that. This has had, it could say good results, bad results, but Montana's primary is going to be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in June. And that's when the Republicans will pick their candidates for office and the Democrats will pick theirs. And usually the incumbents have a big advantage, but this could be a fairly interesting primary, even though we seem to have a lot of diversions going on. Trying to click. There's Robert La Follette. So the result of all of these, well, first off, the issue of interstate commerce stifled many of the state reforms. Oh, sure, there's going to be some reforms, and you get some, city level reforms. One of the things about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, at least you could have some reforms about some of the things in the construction of buildings and safety, and having things like fire escapes and things like that. But remember the Granger laws that try to regulate railroad rates? The same thing will happen here. They will be stifled. And then voting numbers actually dropped. And this shocked the progressives. Of course, they also brought in something called registration, which actually made it a couple more steps to vote. And if you add more steps to vote and make it more difficult, voting numbers will drop. And it probably wasn't their goal, but there are other reasons too. The parties were greatly weakened. Weakened parties mean lower voting numbers. Their goal was to weaken parties. Remember, they had nonpartisan elections. Did I tell you what state is all nonpartisan for their state house? Yeah, Nebraska. The parties do a couple different things. They educate voters, so parties will give out the issues. Yes, they're biased, but that's the definition of partisan parties. That's to get out the voter. They go out, they can help them organize voters, get them out, make it easier for them to vote, go through the process with them. One of the things the machines would do, like in Ohio for the Republicans or Democrats for cities like Philadelphia or Chicago or, of course, New York, they got the voters to the ballot place. They helped them. They made it easy. Now, of course, that could lead to potential corruption, but it also leads to more people voting. And the parties give you an ID. It's not perfect, but most races, people don't follow. They don't know what the candidate stands for. They might not know much at all. But if somebody says we just stick with the two American parties, a Democrat and a Republican, and they say, I'm a Republican, that means they're good in a strong party situation. That means they stand for these things. Or they're a Democrat. I stand for these things. And therefore, if they don't do it with strong parties, there's some control. The party can kick them out. They can drop support. The party has some control. So voters feel like my vote matters. I vote for a Republican because I know what they'll stand for. Not I vote for a Republican because then hope for the best. Or I vote for a Democrat because hope for the best. So strong parties, yes, my vote matters. Weak parties, it doesn't really matter. And I should add, we have very weak parties in the United States, where half of all voters say they're independent. That, by definition, is weak. I know it seems like there's a big party disagreement, but it doesn't mean the parties are strong by any real empirical sense. So what do they lead to? Candidates become free agents. I meant to put candidate free agents. Candidates become free agents. I know, I'll write it back. It's just the candidate, they vote. And then you get what they are. Who will they tell you? What? Remember the election of 1840 and the log cabin campaign? Image became more important than ever before. What image they can portray? Because parties are free agent. By the way, once you portray an image, most people might vote for the image and not know or pay attention enough, or just simply don't have the apparatus to pay attention enough to what they really do. I should add. Yes, I know people should have a responsibility to pay attention, but people also have very difficult lives with lots of things going on. Like all of you have things like school and everything else going on. Your parents have things like you to worry about and all kinds of things. So it's difficult to maintain some kind of knowledge. And so what do you pay attention to? The image. And the image a lot of times can be the image not so much of you, but of your opponent. They're going to do this to you. Fear works. That requires money. There's no coincidence that 1896 was the first election where money really made a difference. Before the Pendleton Act, people would support the Republicans or Democrats because they thought they'd get a job. The Pendleton Act created a professional civil service. So why support a candidate? Well, you want direct legislative action. So you will give money, they can portray their image, and you want something in return. If parties are not important, what becomes important? Interest groups. Interest groups will fill the vacuum. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with interest groups. They can be anything from interest groups about gun manufacturers, or banks, or environmentalism, or labor unions, all kinds of things. But they have one particular interest. They give money because they want something. And so, they fill in the gap. The parties are weakened. You have free agents who seem to be voting based upon who can give them the most money. By the way, is that true? Do candidates vote on based upon, or proposed policy, or their actions based upon who gives them the most money? Maybe, but the perception is enough for a lobby. Like, I saw nods. Is there enough of perception of that? And if there is, it gets the feeling that you might have a plutocracy. And maybe you do, where those with wealth make the decisions. It can feel like it, and therefore, why vote? Weak parties is a real problem. Strong parties can lead to problems too. I should add, a lot of the political disagreements of the 1880s and 1890s, where you had supposedly strong political parties, they weren't necessarily healthy either. It was more just, I'm a Democrat and so there, or I'm a Republican, like it's my team, and not necessary for like what you want the country to be. But there are certainly elements of that today. But, yeah, they thought they wanted direct democracy. It kind of failed miserably. Voter apathy would go to, by the 1970s and 1980s, there would be less than 50% of people voting in presidential elections, eligible voters. Now it's over 60%. And I don't know if that is, parties are still weak. I think a lot of it is just one issue or two issues drum up support. We'll see where that goes. But it has not correlated to strong parties yet. So let's get right to this. Oh, I took a picture before class. This can only mean one thing, people. Wait, I'll take the vote. Yeah, it's unanimous. Ready? Let's write a thesis. Wait, got 2 minutes, go. Don't forget the why. Your position, something to tie those issues of the progressive. This is pretty close to a question they asked about 3 years ago. I don't know if they'll ask it again. It'd be kind of cool if they did, but just, I will explain the creepy picture behind. As you work, I'm going to head back to jungle. It's out of 20. Most people did very well on it. Don't look into your When you're done, make sure that you have a Y, A, B, and C. Give a little bit of explanation on like a phrase for the A, B, and C. That's how I want to share. Okay, when you're done, make sure you have something to tie them together. I mean, who made up the progressive? Who do they want to do it? The reform. Just something tying it together. And go back, make sure you have 3, A, B, and C, and those will be your topics, sentences, and your topics of your body paragraph. Okay, another couple minutes, couple seconds, finish. Come on. It's a recording. Doesn't have a little box or anything. Okay, we done? Exchange. Go pass to the person next to you. Anybody, just go back and look, see if you know exactly where they're going with the essay. Just make a quick exchange with someone next to you. Just quick look. Boom, boom, talk. Boom, move on. Boom, 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 boom. Is that Y, A, B, and C? Good? Yeah. Yeah.
Why are the last sentence? Oh, I know, I like forgot to put it.
A, B, and C. This would be a good essay question to get. All things being equal, just the question is pretty straightforward. You have a lot of different avenues to go on. Yes. Yeah, that's who does work.
Oh.
Political policy. I would have said like through actually the federal government. I mean, that's what I said on mine, but that's exactly the same thing. A political process. You could put down middle class reformers, or you could put down the desire to reform capitalism for fear of revolution. Things like that. Yeah. But political process works because these are political measures. That works fine. You don't need the why doesn't need to be earth-shattering, just something to tie it together. Government action, which is politics. Anybody like to read theirs? Anybody feel so proud? Did you read anybody's thesis that was so good, it literally changed the way you think about life? You're going to walk out of here a different person. Is there anybody who read that? Do you want to throw somebody under a bus right now? Huh? Okay, oh, read yours. You volunteered. I know. Life is fun. Yeah, go ahead.
I said the progressives wanted to reform the economic system of the U.S. by having more government regulation to control monopolies, putting the technocrats in power over standard politicians, and expanding the middle class.
Very good. And you said everything together about government regulation. Reading that, you have all something about regulation throughout the whole essay. Clear, concise. Well done. Let's just write it now. No, well done. Good one. Anybody got another one? Let's get one more. Does anybody want to read theirs? Did you finish yours?
I finished it.
Let's hear.
It's not very good though.
Oh, do you have an A, B, and C? You're good. You're going to be okay.
the progressives wanted to reform by lessening the power of political machines, by weakening parties, creating more democracy, and through nonpartisan elections. I wrote this would lead to election reform, which would include a standardized ballot, laws starting in the legislature, and voters of each party picking the political candidates.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
So try to focus on something like maybe just election reform, you don't need that last part. But, you know, you have an A, B, and C, so that works. Anybody want to read one more? Anybody? I like when I say that, I get some people looking at me. This is my favorite. No volunteers?
I'll do it.
Then I was actually gonna pick you because I knew yours are so good.
Oh, not really, but okay. Progressives wanted to reform the economic system and improve capitalism by creating experts in different public fields, anti-monopoly regulation, as well as increased democracy and social justice.
Very good. You tied it together with the experts, and then what went through. That's well done. It doesn't need to be that big of a deal. Just why has to be something to tie it together. So the person grading it knows, okay, I'm going to read an essay that is organized, that is connected, all the different parts. And as long as you have an element of that in the body paragraph, you should find. You want to see mine? Which is not a heck of a lot different than other people did. Sounds like a lot of other ones. I mean, looking around, looking at what people have. One, two, three. There it is. 3 paragraphs. Boom. Move on. We'll do more of these. We're going to do an essay here probably in about a week and a half in class. And then, okay, we are talking about the triangle shirtwaist fire. So you know about this, right? So I asked you to take notes about this. I'm not adding anything else that you saw. Just make sure that, you know, if the paper was wrong working conditions, there'd be some regulation. They also had some child labor laws that would come out of this, but they're all going to be thrown out by the Supreme Court. So we'll come back to that. We will come back to that. Speaking of coming back to that, no. There we go. The Lochner decision. One of the most important cases, because the progressives are going to come up against the Supreme Court that was hostile to their goals, to say the least. So during Reconstruction, they finally settled back once again to 9 members of the Supreme Court, where we've been ever since. And this is the Fuller Court. There's Bill Fuller. I just took a picture of him to show you. He looks like a Melville Fuller. And there is a law about, New York passed a law about bakers' hours. Bakers are working anywhere from $80 to $100 a week in these bakeries. And the thought was now they overwork. The pay was lower because they're working so many hours, but also making mistakes. But it was overturned by the Supreme Court. And the Lochner decision was a big, big decision. By the way, this is the same court that would be Plessy versus Ferguson. And what they said was the right to contract. The bakers signed the contract. It doesn't matter if there's unequal power between the bakers, the actual workers, and those who have the actual bakeries. That doesn't matter. The contract and the right to contract is more important. And this is a really touchy subject. This goes back to Dartmouth versus Woodward, that court case way back in 1819 in the Marshall Court, but it is also in the Constitution about contracts. Of course, contracts will always favor those with power. Always. Just, that is a truism. And this will become known as the Lochner era of the Supreme Court. Very hostile to reforms, to any regulation. And so, for example, one of the biggies would be throwing out child labor laws. And the Lochner era would not end till the end of the 1930s. But this would be more and more this against regulation. So basically, when I mean judicial activism, basically meaning that the court is throwing out laws. So they're in essence kind of writing laws. You see judicial activism in all kinds of different ways. And this is more and more being called conservative by this era. Yeah, the Lochner era. And so, Because of this, the progressives realized, yes, you can have some reforms in the cities, but they're going to need national level, interstate commerce. And this is from the 1912 election, where you're going to have the Republican Taft, who's at least friendly to some progressive reforms, and there'll be three other candidates, but two in this picture in 1912. The Democrat Woodrow Wilson, I'll get to these, so don't worry. But Wilson, a progressive, and Teddy Roosevelt threw his hat in the ring, and he too was a progressive. In fact, he ran under the Progressive Party. 1912 was quite the election, one of the greats, but we'll come back to this one. But the realization was they need national reforms. Remember, the populists felt this, and they decided to go their own way in their own party, and that fell apart. The progressives are in both. There's some progressive Republicans, some progressive Democrats. There's also the remnants of the old populists within the Democrats, so they might be more friendly to progressive reforms, but that's where they're at. So Teddy Roosevelt rolled into office in 1801, talked about reform, did not yet call himself progressive, but showed signs that there might be a change. So before we write into that, how did Roosevelt get to office again? What happened to McKinley? He's gored to death by a boar, right? An anarchist killed McKinley. There was a strike of hard rock miners called the Anthracite coal strike, 1902, 1903. This area right here, the mountains here, these are hard rock miners. Incredibly dangerous job. Over 100 miners were dying every week in the mines. And when they struck, he didn't come in as what was expected as for the employer. He literally called himself a fair arbiter between the strikers and the bosses. And he, did not formally recognize the union, but he would help negotiate a contract that was at least a little bit favorable to the strikers. This was a pretty big shift to only be on the side of labor. He also set up the Department of Labor. Now, this has been talked about for a very long time. But the Department of Labor, that would not only organize labor, keep statistics on unemployment and things like that. Stats on unemployment is still going to be horrible. It's still really hard to figure out the number of unemployed people. It's really hard today. And they also established the first Labor Day all around the world because of the Haymarket Square affair. It's on May 1st. They didn't want to give that to the United States, so workers got a day off on the first Monday after the first Sunday in September. For some reason, they didn't want it on the 1st of September. Why? Because. And so that's when Labor Day is. He also used the power of the presidency more than any other president since Lincoln, in reality, to push for bills. And he called it the bully pulpit. So here he is, like he's taking command of the Senate. He has a Rough Rider garb. No, it wasn't quite like that. No, it wasn't always successful. But he's the first president who's really out there. Out there giving speeches and noticeable. Here he is negotiating with the coal owners about the coal. He wasn't always like that, but it was a big shift. And so election of 1904, a lot of business people were very fearful of Roosevelt. He might be all right. So they renominated Teddy Roosevelt. It was hard not to. He was incredibly popular personally. But also, Marcus Hanna died quite suddenly. He got elected to the Senate and then passed away. And so Roosevelt's in good shape. I should add, a lot of the biggest businessmen, most notably Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, they gave Roosevelt a lot of money in this campaign. A lot. Alton Parker was the Democrat. And they very actively looked for and got what they called a conservative Democrat to go away from Bryan. And so he was more conservative than Roosevelt, on more pro-big business, more pro-monopoly, less regulation. He was a corporate lawyer. And Roosevelt, even though he got big money, the reason I'm big about conservative is he's a lot different than William Jennings Bryan. A lot different, a total opposite. So Roosevelt, though, dubbed his program the square deal. This is really clever. This progressive platform. Most people don't know the details of the platform, but they can remember a slogan. He had that knack. He looked back at the cross of gold and free silver of Bright and the gold bugs of McKinley. Now, people didn't really know what free silver meant, but they remember the slogan. And what a great image. Here is somebody who has a plan. I'm going to do something. I'm going not only going to make change, but I'm going to be fair to everybody. The square deal. Because you knew people might not remember the programs, but they'll remember the name. And soon, everybody's going to follow this. And you'll see everybody from New Freedom of Woodrow Wilson to Return to Normalcy of Warren G. Harding. What did Roosevelt's cousin, partially by accident, but what was his program? The New Deal. Harry Truman was the Fair Deal. Then they kind of said we have enough deals. Dwight Eisenhower was dynamic conservatism. John Kennedy was New Frontier. Richard Nixon was New Federalism. Ronald Reagan was Let's Make America Great Again. Yes, it'd be stolen, but things are stolen all the time. President Obama had open change. George W. Bush had compassionate conservatism. What do those mean? I mean, we can go look at it, but just remember the name. I stand for that. So let's look at what he stood for. Oh, by the way, here's this beautiful mountain dog because he believed in conservation. Good recovery, huh? Wow. Here's Roosevelt, and it's supposed to be, like the Wild West. But he's making business dance to the square deal dance. We're making them do it. Now, this program is a lot like the populist program. So some of the things it wanted, a progressive income tax and a tax on large estates. Roosevelt, who benefited from a large estate, was worried about this new aristocracy being created, of wealth being passed on to their kids and nothing to do with merit, per se. We'll talk about that more. Why did I capitalize the T? Why not? Also, Social Security, an old age pension. More and more it's being called Social Security. And some kind of national plan for those who could not work anymore. Don't forget, retirement did not exist until the Industrial Revolution. Because the wage system didn't exist. People worked until they couldn't. And then they lived with their family. Things are different with the Industrial Revolution. You know, we've lived our whole life with that, but especially since I'm nearing retirement, I know these things. I pay attention. Next, regulation. So, government regulation. What did he want? Well, of course, antitrust, but also consumer protection. 8-hour workday. That lowers wages, enforced by overtime. Child labor laws. Let's say lower wages. I'm sorry, they both raise wages. Raise wages. And yes, of course, the argument would be, well, companies have to pay more. Yes, but if people have more money, they buy more. There's a cyclical reaction to more money. Yes, it's a constant fight between suppliers and consumers. Conservation of the environment. And I should add, Roosevelt's idea of conservation, he was the first major conservationist leader in the United States. His idea of conservation was, and before the term environmentalism was around, was to preserve the forest and the water and the ocean. Why? So we can use it later. So it's also a conservation for using it later. Like, for example, you have all this water running to the sea. We should be conserving it. 97% of the original forest, or at least what they thought of the forest, it's really hard to figure this out, had been cut down by the United States in 1776. 97% in 1900. And the realization was we're going to run out of trees. And also, if we run out of trees, we run out of forests. There's lots of animals that Roosevelt still wants to kill. If you don't have a forest, where would the animals live? He was a hunter. He looked at it that way. He very much wanted to shoot them. So you better save them. And yeah, yes. We'll talk more about that in a second. Also, women's rights. There's more. He wanted workers' comp. He wanted your workers' compensation insurance. He wanted a direct election of the senators. He wanted a few other things. But these are the biggies. Did all of them pass? Eventually, most of this would pass in some way. So he opened the door for it. Was this good or bad thing? That goes to argument. That's what he believed in. But very much of what he would do, most of this would happen under Franklin Roosevelt, his cousin's New Deal. That's where you see this. And so that's why, the progressives were a mixed bag. So Teddy Roosevelt won. And don't forget, he got lots of money from business groups. Why would they give him money when he's talking about regulating them? Yeah. Partially. He was thinking so it doesn't come after, and also they didn't believe him. They also thought, he's just talking. Remember we did the same thing when we talked about we wanted the ICC? Like with the Sherman Antitrust Act? Yeah, we're just talking. People want it. They clamor for reform. He doesn't really mean it. And only in the South, because there was no Republican Party in the South. A massive sweep here. So the Republican, there's still a lot of Democrats, but it was just a sweep. And so Montana, which voted for Bryan twice, then turned around and voted for Roosevelt. Montana was a populist and a progressive state then. And pretty big victory massive victory in the popular vote. By the way, the biggest minor party, the Socialist Party got a lot of votes, and the Prohibition Party. We're coming to that. But two things. First off, when he took to office, Roosevelt did push for the square deal. And that infuriated the old guard. And there's one more thing. Roosevelt was already a lame duck because he said, I will only run for this term and then I will resign. A lame duck means you're elected and then you'll no longer be in office. I think you can see the problem with that. Roosevelt, who had great goals, but said he won't run again, Republican old guard is already upset at him. They call themselves the old guard, kind of stalwarts. He's going to be out of office in 4 years. Let's just wait him out. He will change his mind, but it's kind of difficult to change your mind when he made a big deal about it. I will not run again. We'll let somebody else. And he was a very young man. Roosevelt's the youngest man to be president. Who's the youngest man to ever be directly elected as president? Remember, he was elected as vice president. John Kennedy, the youngest man to ever be elected president. And so with that, a couple things in. As soon as he took office, he started to push for a square deal, but almost none of it passed. We already talked about this. So, we talked about the Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act already, right? We talked about that in class. With the jungle, those were two big laws he passed. But other than that, he had no other real major successes except for two areas. Oh, we are talking about experts in Europe. We talked about this when I talked about the jungle. The Hepburn Act. The Hepburn Act strengthened the ICC. You see the picture of here's Roosevelt as a police officer and like the train face. It's regulating. So this would be the act that would be basically in place regulating and controlling monopolies in railroads until the 1980s. Now it's the Overland Transport Board, and we're not been anti-monopoly for a very long time. But other than that, his only other area was in conservation. Roosevelt did have a couple successes. He was greatly influenced by a man by the name of John Murray, who'd be best known today for his undying desire to protect. He's called a naturalist. Today we call him an environmentalist. Great friend, great influence on Roosevelt. Would probably be pretty close to environmentalists today. But once again, we don't know, and the term wasn't in use, and he since gone. Murphy's best known for helping preserve Yosemite National Park, even though they almost dammed it. If you've ever been there, oh, so close. They came within inches of damming that thing. They dammed everything. But they created the Forest Service. And the Forest Service would be created as a way to conserve forests on public lands. About a third of the land west of the Mississippi River, including much of Montana, is still public land. Yeah. Say it again. The Midnight Forest? That one I'm not sure about. What is it? Oh, you're talking about the Reclamation Act. We'll get to that. Yep. I just never heard them called Midnight Forest before. Yeah, I'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Reclamation Act allows the president to make designate areas as forest. Yeah. Midnight Forest. That's a good. Yeah, they're almost always done by the president just at the end. I've never heard that term, but good. I'm glad you said it. All right. On this happy note, when is the test? Do you want to do it Thursday? Do I want to do it Thursday? Not really.
So the review this.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Why did you go to Vegas? Oh,
They're
yeah.
expiring like this March. We're like, oh, no, go somewhere.
Gotta go somewhere. Was it warm? We'll see you. Goodbye. See you. Yeah, what the president has is called national monuments, and basically create national forest out of them. That's really it. I've never heard him called that, but I'm really glad you told me that term.
Apparently they're called that because they were signed away like right before midnight. So
Like midnight, like right at the end of the president's term.
yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Okay, thank you.
Doing these thingies, but like
Did you see that?
yeah, it's so like we're like standing in the doorway.
Yes. Blame me.
Anyway,
Oh, what were you gonna do before I got out? I think I said it. Really? Yeah. Hey, I get my great song in the springtime.
Hold on.
Is your first day in the office? Is that your first day in there?
No.
Oh my god. Mine's like literally
I need something like so far. Yeah, I know. I don't think it's that long, but I didn't realize it's a month and a half. I like just made it very detailed. Yeah. It seems no. Give me 2 weeks. You see that? I don't know. So my mouth is still scarred. I don't watch. You already like I already know about this stuff. It's in 8th grade. We had to like read about it. So I'm not waiting for them to like talk about it. Oh, mine were like I don't know for Congress I know how you need to it's like these sources if I were doing that, like I like
Hey, how we doing? I'd like to say it's good to see all of you. Take out the jungle. Watson, take out that jungle? Take out the triangle shirtwaist fire.